My name is Marjorie Blake. I'm 80 years old. And every floorboard in this house creaks with the sound of a life I built with my own hands. I raised my son here after my husband passed, patched clothes for neighbors to pay bills, and kept every light on by sewing late into the night. People call me stubborn, old-fashioned, but that's fine. Because when you spend a lifetime giving, you believe, somewhere deep down, that love will come back around. You never expect it'll be your own child who sees your sacrifices as clutter. You never think you'll have to protect yourself from the very person you once gave everything to. The routine was sacred, not because I was afraid of change, but because it gave me peace. Every morning at 6, Zerzo sharp, I'd sit by the window with my tea, chamomile, 2 sugars, watch the light creep in across the garden I still kept myself. At 6:30, I'd walk to the post office and back. My cane slowed me down these past few years, especially after the fall that nearly broke my hip. But I still made it home in 45 minutes on the dot. People in Springfield knew me as the clock lady, partly because I used to repair wristwatches for extra money, but mostly because I lived like one. Precise, dependable, ticking onward. My name is Marjorie, and I have lived in this house for 56 years. I moved here with my husband, Ronald. In 1969, we had dreams like most young couples, small ones, but honest. This home was a 2-bedroom fixer-upper then. We sanded every floorboard together, painted the porch a soft mint green, and planted roses in the front yard because Ronald said they reminded him of my smile. He died of a heart attack in '83, just like that, gone. I was 38. Corbin was 10, and the world didn't slow down for either of us. I became mother, father, and provider all in one. I took in alterations, stitched uniforms for the local school, even made wedding gowns at half price just to keep food on the table. Corbin never went to bed hungry, never missed a field trip. He wore name-brand sneakers while I patched the soles of my own shoes with glue. I didn't think much of it back then. I was just doing what mothers do. When he got into university, I cried. Not because he was leaving, but because I had managed to give him a future. I sold Ronald's old coin collection to help with tuition. I never told Corbin that. He thought it came from some savings account. I let him think that. Some truths are a mother's alone to carry. He married young, Hilda, a sharp-tongued girl from 2 towns over. She wasn't cruel, just cold. She never called me Mom, always Mrs. Blake. I gave them the apartment above my garage when they were starting out. Eventually, when they wanted something bigger, I sold a piece of my backyard for development and gave them the down payment. You're doing too much, Esther would say. She's been my neighbor and closest friend for 40 years. But I always replied, he's my son. That's what love looks like. The house grew quieter with each year. Corbin visited less and less. At first it was work, then it was the kids, then it was nothing. Birthdays turned into text messages, holidays into voicemails. But I kept the spare bedroom ready, his old baseball gloves still sitting on the shelf. It comforted me, made me feel like I hadn't outlived my use. I never asked him for anything. Not once. I lived off Social Security, a few savings bonds Ronald left behind, and what I earned from fixing old clothes. I had my porch, my roses, and my quiet rhythm. That was enough. But lately, things had started to change, not just in my bones, but in how people looked at me. The pharmacist offered to carry my bag. The mailman asked if I had anyone checking on me. Even Hilda called on Christmas, her voice sweet like syrup gone stale. We were just wondering how you're doing. Marjorie, you still alone in that big old house? It wasn't the words, it was the tone. Concern laced with something else. Something I couldn't quite name. I told myself not to overthink. But Esther noticed it too. You need to be careful, she warned one afternoon while handing me a slice of blueberry pie. People don't always mean well just because they smile. I smiled back, but inside, I felt something loosen, a thread I'd held tight for so long, suddenly tugging. Still, I didn't expect anything drastic. After all, Corbin was my son, the same boy I stayed up all night nursing through the flu, the same boy I defended when the teacher said he'd never pass math. No matter how distant he'd become, I still believed somewhere deep down that he'd come back to me, not out of duty, but out of love. But that was before the knock at the door. It was a Tuesday morning, May 15th, to be exact. I had just sat down to mend a jacket for a neighbor when I heard the car pull up. Not just any car, a sleek, black SUV, too expensive for anyone in this neighborhood. I peeked out through the lace curtain, and my breath caught. Corbin and Hilda. I hadn't seen them in almost a year. I wiped my hands on my apron, adjusted the pins stuck to my collar, and reached for my cane. My heart beat in strange rhythms. Not joy, not quite. More like confusion, mixed with a tremor of dread. Still, I smiled, because that's what mothers do. We smile, even when we sense a storm. They were already halfway up the porch when I opened the door. "Hi, Mom," Corbin said, his voice bright, too bright. "You look, wow, just the same." Hilda gave a tight-lipped nod. "Marjorie, still keeping this place in one piece." I nodded. "Come in." I was just about to put the kettle on. As they stepped inside, their eyes darted across the room, not in nostalgia, but with the air of people appraising a property. My house, my life. And in that moment, though I didn't yet understand why, I felt it. Something was coming. This wouldn't be a simple visit. This wasn't about tea or family. This was the beginning of something else. I just didn't know yet that this would become the kind of revenge story no one would ever expect from a quiet woman with a sewing machine and a cane. But I would learn, and they would, too. In time, they stayed longer than usual. That should have been my first warning. In the past, Corbin couldn't get out the door fast enough, always in a rush to beat traffic, or make a meeting, or get the kids from practice. But this time, he and Hilda settled in, comfortable, too comfortable. After tea, they wandered through the house like guests in a museum. Hilda made small comments, little darts disguised as compliments. "Oh, you've kept all the original furniture." So vintage. She ran a finger across my mantle like she was checking for dust. I watched her eyes land on the grandfather clock near the stairs, Ronald's pride and joy, the one I had fixed every year since he passed. Corbin was more subtle. He walked into the kitchen and opened the pantry without asking, looked around like he was measuring the space with his eyes. "So, you're still getting around fine?" he asked, coming back into the living room. "Of course I am," I replied. "Why wouldn't I be?" He gave a little laugh. "No reason. Just, this place is old. Lots of stairs. Narrow halls. I've lived here nearly 60 years, I said flatly. "I think I know my way around." He didn't respond right away, just nodded and gave me a tight smile. But that was when the second warning bell rang in my chest. People don't comment on your home unless they're thinking about it like it's theirs. Dinner was strange. Hilda offered to cook, which was a first. She moved around my kitchen like she'd done it 100 times. Pulled open drawers without asking. Used my knives like they belonged to her. I sat in my armchair in the living room, fingers curled around my cane, watching, listening. My appetite had vanished. When we ate chicken breast and canned green beans, they peppered me with questions I didn't like. How often do you see your doctor? Do you take your meds on time? Who checks in on you? Other than Esther. Have you ever considered assisted living? Just for convenience. I answered as politely as I could. But inside, I was shaking. They were circling me, prodding, looking for cracks. That night, they stayed over, another first. Corbin made a show of insisting, saying they wanted to spend quality time. I knew better, but I smiled and showed them to the guest room. By 10 p.m., I went to my own bedroom and closed the door softly. My bones ached, not from age, but from dread. I couldn't sleep, so I sat on the edge of the bed with my hearing aid turned up, just in case. And that's when I heard them. Their voices floated down the hall, low, but not low enough. "It's perfect," Hilda whispered. "The house needs a little work, but the neighborhood's still solid. Even a cash buyer would jump at it." "We'll have to push her," Corbin replied. "She's stubborn as hell. We don't push. We convince. If we tell her it's for her safety, that she can't manage on her own anymore. And the car," he added. "That Buick, Do you know what collectors would pay for that? I sat frozen, my hand gripping the bedpost so tightly my knuckles turned white. It was never about my safety, never about care. They were planning to take everything. I've already talked to the director at Quiet Harbor, Hilda continued. We just need her signature. If she resists, there's always the medical route. She had a fall last year. Add in her age and a few doctor's notes. Don't say that, Corbin hissed. We don't want legal messes. It's better if she signs willingly. She trusts me. I could barely breathe. They'd already put down a deposit. They'd already prepared the paperwork. All they needed was my cooperation, or my decline in health. I sat there for I don't know how long. Eventually, their voices faded. The house was quiet again, but I wasn't. I didn't cry. That surprised me. I thought I would. I expected tears, but what I felt was colder, sharper, like a knife sliding into cloth. It was betrayal, but deeper than that, it was erasure. Not even dramatic erasure, just quiet removal. As if I was an old chair they didn't know what to do with. So they planned to donate me to the nearest facility and take over the room. To the audience watching, maybe some of you know that silence. That moment you realize you're no longer seen as a mother or a person, but as a burden someone's trying to solve. If you've ever felt that, even for a second, then you know exactly what I felt that night. I stared at the ceiling, remembered every sandwich I'd packed for Corbin's lunchbox. Every night I stayed up sewing his costumes for school plays. Every time I said, "It's okay, sweetheart, Mommy's fine," even when I was anything but. And now I was a transaction, a signature, a thing to be placed somewhere out of the way. I could have gone into that hallway, could have shouted, thrown them out, but I didn't. No, I had something better. I had time. I had silence. And I had the one thing Corbin had forgotten I still possessed after all these years. Strategy. He thought I was just an old woman in a creaky house, but he forgot who built the foundation. The next morning, I made them pancakes, smiled like nothing had changed, thanked them for visiting, hugged them at the door and waved as they pulled away. Then I locked the door behind them and picked up the phone because they'd declared a quiet war, and I was ready to fight back on my own terms. The morning after they left, I stood in my kitchen, staring at the old checkered tablecloth I'd had since Corbin was 5. There was a tiny ketchup stain near the edge. He'd knocked over a bottle during one of his birthday parties. I never scrubbed it out fully. I liked knowing a piece of him still lived somewhere in this house. But that morning, that stain felt like something else entirely. A bruise, a scar. I went about my chores the way I always did. Boiled water for tea. Fed the robins in the backyard. Took my pills with half a slice of toast. But everything felt different now. Off. As if the walls themselves had shifted. Leaning in to whisper what I already knew. Nothing was ever going to be the same. Later that afternoon, I opened the cedar chest in the corner of my bedroom. Inside were all the things most people would have thrown away. Baby shoes, school drawings. The teddy bear Corbin couldn't sleep without until he was 9. I picked it up gently. Its one good eye stared back at me, threadbare and lopsided. I sat down on the bed and held that bear tight to my chest. I don't remember crying, not loudly. Anyway, the tears came soft, like rain on old tin, the kind that just keeps falling and falling until everything's soaked. What hurt wasn't just the betrayal, it was the quietness of it, the way it had crept in without warning. Like a draft you don't notice until your bones ache. I had spent a lifetime giving, and now it was as if none of it had ever mattered. No one was coming to thank me. No one was coming to stop this. Not my son, not his wife, not even God. It felt like they were going to take my house, my car, my life, and they were going to do it politely, with paperwork and brochures and fake smiles, as if helping me disappear was an act of love. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every room felt haunted by memories that no longer felt safe. The hallway where I'd once kissed Corbin goodnight, the laundry room where I'd stitched patches on his jeans, the living room where Ronald used to read the Sunday paper, his coffee cup always leaving a ring on the side table. I walked from room to room, trailing my fingers along the furniture, saying goodbye to a life that hadn't yet ended, but was being wrapped up like old china. I didn't tell Esther yet. I couldn't. I wasn't ready to say it out loud, because if I did, it would make it real. The next day, I went out to tend the garden. The roses were blooming. Ronald's roses. That's what I always called them. A soft pink with ruffled edges. He'd planted them for our 25th anniversary. As I bent down to trim the wilted stems, I caught sight of the front porch. I imagined Hilda standing there, clipboard in hand, asking movers to be careful with the boxes. I pictured Corbin in my armchair, calling the realtor, laughing about how easy it was to convince his mother. And in that moment, something inside me went very still. I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't sad. I was clear. They thought they were writing the end of my story. They didn't realize I was just turning the page. That night, I called Esther, asked her to come over for tea. No urgency in my voice. When she arrived, I poured 2 cups like always. Blueberry muffins on a paper plate. We talked about her grandson's graduation, about the weather, about the church bake sale. Then, as naturally as I could, I said, Corbin and Hilda visited this week. Esther paused. Is that so? They're worried about me, I said with a soft laugh. Think I need more help. She narrowed her eyes. Worried how? I looked her in the face. They want to move me into Quiet Harbor. Already made a deposit. Esther didn't say anything at first. Then she set her teacup down hard enough to make it rattle. They did what? They want the house, I said simply, and the car, and anything else they can get. I imagine. That's disgusting, she muttered. After all these years, I nodded. We didn't need to say more. Esther had seen it. The birthdays skipped. The phone calls unanswered. The years of silence. You're not going anywhere unless you want to, she said firmly. I know, I replied. That's why I need your help. And just like that, the quiet grief inside me shifted into something else. Something strong, determined. I wasn't gone yet. I wasn't helpless. And I would not let my own son erase me before I was ready to go. That night, I opened my closet and pulled out an old leather notebook. The one I used to keep Ronald's handyman notes in. I flipped past sketches of shelf brackets and fertilizer schedules, stopping at a blank page, and I wrote, in big bold letters, my plan. Underneath, I listed 3 names: Seth, Garrett, Dylan. Each name came with a purpose, a task, and a quiet promise. I will not go quietly. No matter how gently they try to bury me, I've always believed that heartbreak doesn't come in a loud crash. It comes quietly, like a slow leak you don't notice until the floor beneath you is warped. The night after Esther left, I sat alone at the kitchen table, the light above flickering just slightly. Like even the house wasn't sure how to hold me anymore. I stared down at my mug of chamomile tea, gone cold. Across from me sat the old notebook where I'd written my plan. The pen next to it trembled in my hand, not from weakness, but from something deeper, restraint. I wasn't writing a revenge plan. I was writing my survival. That's what people never understand about women like me, about mothers. We don't want revenge. We just want to not be erased. The next morning, I put on my best sweater, the one with the tiny pearl buttons, and walked across the street to Esther's. She was already on the porch, watering her petunias. She looked up, saw my face, and without a word, opened the door wide. Coffee, she asked. I nodded. She poured it strong, the way I like it, and slid a plate of toast across the table. You're ready, aren't you? She said. Sitting down across from me, I nodded again. I'm not going to let them take my life from me while I'm still living it. She reached across and squeezed my hand. Good. Now let's get to work. First call was to Seth, retired, but still sharper than a sewing needle. He was Ronald's best friend once, and he never forgot a favor. When I told him everything about the visit, the overheard conversation, the deposit they'd already made at Quiet Harbor, he didn't react with shock, just quiet fury. They think they're smart, he said, tapping a pen against his desk, but they're greedy. And greedy people always overplay their hand. I don't want to destroy them, I said softly. I just want to stop them. "You're not destroying anything," he replied. "You're protecting what's yours." He promised to look into the legality of the documents, see if anything I'd signed during their visit could be twisted against me. Spoiler alert, it couldn't. At least not yet. The moment I stepped into a nursing home and relinquished medical control, things might change. But until then, I still had power, more than they realized. I remember that moment so clearly, hanging up the phone with Seth, looking down at my wrinkled hands resting on my lap. I felt something shift inside me. I wasn't weak. I wasn't done, and I wasn't going to beg my son to love me again. I'd been doing that for years, in silence, leaving the porch light on during holidays, saving slices of pie just in case he dropped by, forgiving the missed birthdays, the forgotten Mother's Days, the tight-lipped visits where he barely looked me in the eye. I'd told myself it was okay, that children change, that maybe I had done something wrong, that maybe I deserved the distance, but not this. This wasn't distance. This was betrayal. You don't try to bury your mother while she's still breathing just because you're in debt. Esther drove me to the bank that afternoon, and I had a long talk with Mr. Harris, the manager I'd known for 30 years. I didn't give away too much, just asked about the logistics of withdrawing my savings, closing accounts. He raised an eyebrow, but didn't ask questions. Not really. He knew me. He trusted me. "You thinking of going somewhere?" he asked as he handed me a slip. "Maybe," I said. "Someplace new." That night, I sat at my workbench in the laundry room, where I still kept a few sewing clients just to stay busy. I had a pile of trousers to hem, but I pushed them aside and pulled out Corbin's old teddy bear. I stitched up the loose seam on its foot, then tucked a folded note inside. I didn't know why I did it. Maybe for myself. Maybe for the little boy he used to be. Maybe because part of me still needed to say something he'd never hear. "I gave you everything I had, and I would have given you more if you'd asked with love instead of a plan." I sewed it shut neatly. You wouldn't even know anything had ever been broken. The next morning, Seth called back. He'd spoken with his contacts. Corbin was in trouble. Deep. He'd sold the apartment I'd helped him buy, apparently months ago, for far below market value. Rumors of gambling debt, loan sharks, lies he'd hidden behind polite phone calls and fake smiles. I felt a strange, hollow ache in my chest, not because I was surprised, but because I wasn't. Seth asked if I wanted to confront him. I said no. There's no point yelling into a canyon. It just throws your voice back at you, distorted. "I'm not going to yell." I told him, "I'm going to vanish." "Where will you go?" he asked. "Not sure yet. Somewhere by the ocean." "Maybe," he chuckled. "You always did say you'd see the Pacific before you died." "Well," I said, "I suppose it's time I made good on that." After the call, I stood in the doorway of my bedroom, looking in, my quilted bedspread, my rocking chair, the tiny photo of Ronald on the nightstand. It all looked so small, so contained. Like a stage set after the audience has gone. This wasn't home anymore. Not really. Home was trust, and it had been taken. Now it was just a house. But I had time, a few days, maybe a week. Enough time to finish my plan, to leave on my own terms, to slip through their fingers before they could sign away my life like a receipt at a hardware store. I reached for the notebook and wrote the final words of the page. "I will not be erased." The morning of the sale, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, buttoning up the navy blue cardigan Ronald bought me the year Corbin graduated college. I hadn't worn it in a while. It felt too nice for a regular day. But this wasn't a regular day. This was the day I took back my life. Seth pulled into the driveway just after 8:00 a.m. He was driving that old SUV of his, the one with the broken radio and fishing rods rattling in the back. He gave 2 short honks and waved from the front seat like we were headed to the county fair. I opened the door and took one last look around the house. I didn't say goodbye. Not out loud, but my eyes did. They lingered on the kitchen table where I taught Corbin to write his name, on the staircase where I once sat crying after Ronald died, on the windowsill where I'd set cooling pies every summer for 30 years. Then I walked out, closed the door behind me, and didn't look back. Garrett Wilson, Seth's old friend and a retired realtor. met us at his office on Maple Street. He looked the same as I remembered. Wide grin, coffee-stained teeth, kind eyes. The kind of man who still held doors open and called women ma'am like it was a compliment. He didn't ask questions when I handed over the keys. Just slid the papers across the desk and said, "You're sure about this, Marjorie?" "I've never been more sure of anything," I replied. The sale went quickly. Garrett paid $210, $1,000 in cash. No inspections. No drama. Just a handshake and a sigh. It was below market value, sure, but I wasn't selling a house. I was buying freedom. Next stop was the car. Seth's nephew Jared had been eyeing my 1968 Buick for years. I kept it in near mint condition, even polished the chrome every other Sunday. When Jared saw it in person, he let out a low whistle. "She's a beauty," he said, running his hand across the hood. "You sure you want to let her go?" I smiled. "She's got more years left in her than I do, and I'd rather she go to someone who knows how to appreciate her." $15,000, signed and sealed. We cashed both checks at the bank, then sat down with Mr. Harris to finalize the withdrawals. He didn't say much, just processed everything with a quiet sort of respect. When he slid the leather case full of cash across the desk, he looked me in the eye and said, "I hope wherever you're going, they treat you better than the people you're leaving behind." "I hope so too," I replied, tucking the briefcase under my arm like it was made of feathers instead of hundreds. Before we left, I rented a safety deposit box. I didn't fill it with money. I filled it with memory. Inside, I placed a few items, each chosen carefully. Corbin's teddy bear, stitched and soft, with a note tucked inside. "I gave you everything, even the parts of myself I didn't know I had." A roll of Monopoly money, bound in a bank band, labeled, "All the money you'll get from me." A photo of me, Ronald, and baby Corbin on the porch of the house we'd just sold, with a message written on the back. This was a home. You made it a transaction. And last, a pocket watch that had belonged to my father, on the inside cover. I had it engraved. "Time puts everything in its place." I left the key with Ruth, the nurse at Quiet Harbor, and also Esther's daughter. She promised to deliver it at just the right moment. By late afternoon, I was back home, if you could still call it that. The house no longer belonged to me. The title had been signed, sealed, and recorded. I moved through the rooms one last time, taking only what mattered. A picture of Ronald in his army uniform, the rosary beads from my nightstand drawer, my sewing scissors, a quilt my mother made before she passed, a tiny box of old buttons that Corbin used to love playing with when he was little. Everything else stayed. The furniture, the dishes, the photo albums, even my rocking chair. Let him have it. Let him sit in it and wonder why it doesn't bring him peace. That night, I didn't cry. I thought I would. I thought I'd break down in the bathroom or on the porch or maybe while folding my last load of laundry. But there were no tears, just clarity. It wasn't sadness. It was stillness, a clean kind of quiet, like the air after a storm. I slept for 3 hours, then woke up just before dawn. I dressed in layers, packed my bag with care, tucked the most important documents into the lining of my coat. By 7:00 a.m., I was standing in the living room, waiting. Corbin and Hilda were coming to move me to Quiet Harbor at 9. Sarah. I didn't plan to be here when they arrived. Instead, Dylan, Seth's great-nephew and a nurse at the facility, would confirm my early check-in and politely inform them I had already been admitted. Ruth would hand them the safety deposit box key. And me, I'd be halfway down the highway in Seth's SUV, headed west. We'd mapped it out. A quiet town on the Oregon coast. A place with cabins by the water and no questions asked. Garrett even knew someone renting long-term, modest, but clean. A new beginning. One I didn't need permission for. Seth arrived right on time. He loaded my bag into the back, opened the door like a gentleman, and turned to me with a soft smile. "You ready?" I looked at the house one last time. "I've been ready," I said. We drove away slowly. No hurry. No drama. Just two old friends taking the long road to the ocean. I didn't speak for a while. Just watched the town slip away in the rear view mirror. The gas station. The church. the school where I once sewed costumes for the holiday play. None of it belonged to me anymore, but that was okay. Because for the first time in a very long time, I belonged to myself. By the time Corbin and Hilda pulled up to Quiet Harbor in their spotless black SUV, I was already gone. Dylan greeted them with his usual calm professionalism. He'd been briefed. He knew exactly what to say. She checked in early this morning. He told them. Said she wanted a quiet entrance. Her room is all set. Corbin blinked. What? She didn't say anything about that. I guess she made up her mind overnight. Dylan replied. Oh, and she left this for you. He handed Corbin a small envelope. Inside was the key to the safety deposit box I'd rented the day before. Neatly taped to the key was a note for when you're ready to understand. That's what I'd written. Not to accuse, not to punish, but to open a door, one I knew he might not have the courage to walk through for years. Still, I left it unlocked. Back in Springfield, Corbin drove straight to the bank. Hilda sat stiffly in the passenger seat, chewing her lip. She asked twice if they should call me. He ignored her. They handed over the key to the teller, who led them to a small room in the back. The box was opened in silence. First, the teddy bear. Corbin stared at it like it was some long-lost relic. Hilda turned it over, frowning. What is this? He didn't answer. Then came the bundle of Monopoly money, neatly bound and labeled. All the money you'll get from me. Hilda's face flushed. Then the photo, me, Ronald, and baby Corbin on the porch of our first home. On the back, I'd written, this was a home. You made it a transaction. Corbin didn't speak. His hands trembled as he picked up the final item, the pocket watch. He opened it slowly. Inside the lid, time puts everything in its place. They say the silence in that room was so thick, even the hum of the air vent seemed to vanish. I wasn't there to see it. I didn't need to be. Sometimes, the most powerful things we say are the ones we don't stick around to hear. That same day, they drove back to my old house, only it wasn't mine anymore. Garrett had already given the keys to his son, Tom, who, by chance, had grown up just down the block and used to mow my lawn for $5 a week. He now lived there with his wife and 2 small children. It was their home now. When Corbin knocked, Tom answered the door. Confused, "Can I help you?" "This is my mother's house," Corbin said, his voice sharp. "We're here to pick up her things." Tom raised an eyebrow. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. This house was purchased in full last week. I have the deed right here." Hilda tried to push forward. She didn't tell us anything. She couldn't have sold it without letting us know. She didn't have to. Tom said firmly. She owned it. It was hers. Corbin stood on the porch, stunned. Hilda looked like she might collapse. There were no things to pick up, no rights to claim, no more plans to execute. The game was over. That evening, as the sun dipped low over the Oregon coast, I stood barefoot in the sand just outside the small cabin Seth and I had rented. The air was cool and salty. The waves rolled in slow, steady breaths. There was a peace in it, a rhythm that matched something in my chest for the first time in years. We'd unpacked, set up the small kitchen, and walked into town for fresh bread and eggs. The locals were friendly. The air smelled like pine and sea. Seth sat on the porch behind me, sipping from a tin mug. "You did it, Marjorie," he said. "You made it out." I smiled. I didn't just make it out. I made it back to myself. There were no fireworks, no big show, just quiet. A woman who refused to be erased. The next day, I received a letter from Ruth. It was short, just a few sentences. He opened the box. He didn't say a word, just sat there. Then he left. I don't know if he understood, but I think he felt it. That was enough for me. I didn't need him to beg forgiveness. I didn't even need him to call. I just needed to know he saw it. That something in that box reached a place in him I hadn't been able to reach in years. Maybe it wasn't enough to fix him, but it was enough to free me. That night, Seth and I sat by the fire, listening to the waves crash against the rocks. He poured us each a small glass of brandy and raised his in a toast. "To new lives," he said. I raised mine, to not being invisible. We clinked glasses, And in the soft hush of that coastal night, I felt something return to me, something I'd given away so long ago I barely remembered having it. Dignity. To those of you watching this story, I wonder, have you ever felt like someone tried to write you out of your own life? Have you ever given everything to someone who turned around and treated you like a burden instead of a blessing? You're not alone, and you're not invisible. Sometimes, the quietest women carry the loudest truth, and sometimes, the softest exit leaves the deepest echo.